I'm here with my good man, Billy Carson. If you want to, I guess, go first, Billy, as to how you came about, like the findings where it seems that Jesus was not crucified, or that's not accurate.
Sure. And in my videos, and if you listen to the podcast, the statement is according to the Sinai Bible, and the text there actually is about 12 to 14,000 differences between the Sinai Bible and the King James Version of the Bible, which came much later. And then also one of the things that were interesting is that they discovered the book of Jesus is, according to some scholars, that's a little controversial, but they claim that this is an accurate record that Jesus may have even been married, which then, adds more, if that's true, it adds more to the hypothesis that maybe he wasn't crucified. I just personally believe that Jesus was an amazing human being. I don't think that he was the Son of God in the sense that he's God, but that we're all gods. As he said, ye are gods. And I just personally believe that the return of the Christ is the return of the Christ consciousness. When we can all achieve a certain level of knowledge, wisdom, passion, understanding, empathy, love that he came to this planet with, and we get that in our mind and our conscience, and we can act on those incredible emotions and that understanding, that the whole world is going to transform instantaneously. And I think at the second coming is the coming of the Christ consciousness to the planet, not a human being flying back to Earth to save people. That's just my personal understanding of how I've perceived it over many, many years of going through this information and going through all this text.
When you say the Sinai Bible, what are you referring to specifically?
It's the biblical text that was written. It made it into you can actually look it up on Amazon. It's a Bible called, I have a version at home. It's called the Sinai Bible, right, from Mount Sinai. I'm assuming that's the mountain that they're referencing there. But they put together their own version of the biblical text prior to the King James Version being put out.
Sure. So when you refer to the Sinai Bible, would you be referring to Codex Sinaiticus? Like the codex that comes. Okay. That's why I was trying to get some clarification, because so you can actually go and see Codex Sinaiticus is at the British Library. So you can go and see it. It's on display. And the British Library has actually digitized the entire manuscript. So I work with manuscripts in my linguistic work. I'm an expert on early Christian scribal culture, and particularly in Greek and Coptic manuscripts. I actually have a facsimile. So I have a photocopy that was done by the British Library of Codex Sinaiticus that I work with in my office. So I have it here. And the only reason I asked for clarification is because I want to make sure that what I'm addressing is actually what you mean.
Gotcha.
And not addressing something else. Because the Codex Sinaiticus in particular is just it's a 4th century Greek manuscript. Mm-hmm. It comes from approximately between 325 and 350 AD. And its text of the Gospels reads almost identical to the modern Greek text that we develop translations from. So my curiosity is just simply in kind of exploring, when you say that it denies the crucifixion or that the crucifixion isn't there, I mean, I can go on right now, Codex Sinaiticus, and I can look up the end of, say, Matthew 27, where it has Jesus being crucified.
Right. There you go.
And that's in Codex Sinaiticus, or, the John 19, or any of the other ones. So I think my confusion is that it doesn't read any differently. So actually, are you able to pull up a website with the viewers or listeners or whatever
I'm
be able to see
looking for it right now to make sure I have the right the version that I'm looking at.
I'm just curious, like the Sinai Bible, where was that piece
I found
discovered?
the text where I was referencing. Actually, I was misquoted. I misquoted there. It's the Gospel of Barnabas.
So that's good. So let's deal with that too, because I've actually worked with, there are 2 manuscripts of the Gospel of Barnabas. The Gospel of Barnabas is a really interesting document because it is a known forgery. And so that's why I think it's important to get to these sources. So at the very start of the Gospel of Barnabas, which we only have 2 copies of, One is in Italian and one is in Spanish. We see right off the bat that the Gospel of Barnabas, not to be confused with either the Epistle of Barnabas or the Acts of Barnabas, which are two apocryphal documents from the 2nd century, but the Gospel of Barnabas in particular, we know it's a forgery because it does things like in chapter 92, it says that Jesus spent 40 days on Mount Sinai, and then he came to the Jordan River and he walked to Jerusalem. But Mount Sinai is more than a week's journey away from Jerusalem, and neither Mount Sinai nor Jerusalem are close to the Jordan River. Never mind there not being a route from the Jordan River to like around Mount Sinai or going to Jerusalem. But there are internal problems with the Gospel of Barnabas, which indicate that it shows no actual indication of evidence of coming from or even having knowledge of first century Jewish understanding. It actually says Jesus is the Christ, but not the Messiah, which indicates that whoever the author is, he didn't know that those were the same words. And I think a bigger problem is that the Gospel of Barnabas actually paraphrases Dante's Inferno, which was written in 1314. So there's a lot of internal evidences that disqualify the Gospel of Barnabas, never mind the fact that we don't have any evidence of it prior to the 14th century, and none in any other language other than Middle Age Italian Italian and Spanish. But the internal content of the Gospel of Barnabas disqualifies it from being ancient. And then the fact that it's doing things like paraphrasing Dante, or it also refers to a rule of the time of Jubilee, which was changed in the Middle Ages from what it was in the biblical year of Jubilee. And it goes with the Middle Ages concept, not the ancient concept. So if there is something that denies the crucifixion, I want to make sure that I'm analyzing it and that the methodology by which I analyze it actually reveals that the content can be accurately tied to the event. So if we're talking about, say, Codex Sinaiticus, that's in the 4th century. Now that is, I would agree with you, Billy, our oldest copy of the Bible in the sense of cover to cover, Genesis to Revelation copy of the Bible.
Right.
The problem is that we have individual copies of all 4 Gospels going back hundreds of years before Codex Sinaiticus.
He's right.
So I have a facsimile behind me of P66. This is a late 2nd century copy of the Gospel of John. I work with this particular manuscript. I can just show the screen right here. This is an almost complete copy of the Gospel of John.
I have that papyrus at home.
Oh, that's
so I'll show you this. So the documents you actually see on my bookshelf behind me are facsimile papyri that I've made. So when I was in Egypt last summer, I went and I got made for me some papyrus sheets. And so I take these papyrus sheets, which are made from the papyrus plant. And then when I go and I look at actual manuscripts, so I was at the University of Philadelphia last summer, and I went and I saw a document called P1, which is a 3rd century fragment of the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew. And so what I did is I sat down with that original and I produced a facsimile. I copied the text. First of all, I cut it out with an X-Acto knife in not the original 3rd century one on my papyrus. I cut out with an X-Acto knife this guy, and then I copied the text transcriptionally on the front and the back. So papyrus is just simply, it's what it's made out of.
Yeah.
The only with what you said, Billy, is that we have single copies of the Gospels that can be dated to the 2nd century that all do have the crucifixion. And so if we're relying on something like the Gospel of Barnabas, which is not just like, it's not that there's debate about it, it's that it's a known forgery. I mean, no one's referring to the Gospel of Barnabas as anything other than...
If you say it's a known forgery, yes, but I'm going to go with that. Let's talk about the Old Testament a little bit and leading up into the New Testament.
Well, hold on, because do you mind if I address the Gospel of Jesus' wife?
Sure, go ahead.
What was her name again? I'm like trying to write notes like I know what I'm doing, but I'm just curious.
So the Gospel of Jesus' wife doesn't actually mention. So oftentimes what happens is that the text of the Gospel of Jesus' wife is kind of paralleled with the Gospel of Philip, which mentions that that Jesus would kiss Mary Magdalene on the mouth. And so those are kind of used in parallel to kind of for this argument that Jesus was married. So the Gospel of Jesus' Wife is in the Harvard Library. However, the reason we know it's also not legitimate is because even though the manuscript, the papyrus that it's on, was carbon dated to the 4th century, the text was actually copied from a PDF version of the Gospel of Thomas known as Grandin's Interlinear. And there was a mistake in the Coptic text of Grandin's Interlinear that was copied into the Gospel of Jesus' Wife. So we know that this is not a legitimate document, even though the papyrus is ancient, and this happens a lot with forgeries. I have a couple of friends who have actually worked on projects that have revealed forgeries within Dead Sea Scroll manuscripts and within other ancient Christian papyri. But the reason why we know the Gospel of Jesus' Wife, and that Karen King, who kind of vouched for it and she lost a lot of credibility, unfortunately, for her, and she's admitted that it's a fake as well, was because we can tie it directly to not copying from an ancient text, but actually copying from an online version of the Gospel of Thomas in a PDF form. And the mistake on that PDF form was copied into the text that was borrowed in the phraseology of Jesus' wife.